goes for business.
What do you have? Do you work in a business? Do you want some fruit?
I'm homeless. I'm actually a homeless person at the minute, but I'm interested in business.
Yeah.
Well, let's have a look at your non-elected Prime Minister delivering his New Year speech to inspire and galvanise us as we stare down the barrel of another frankly terrifying year. Here he is, talking down to us rather nervously, like a supply teacher to a class of 4-year-olds.
Rishi Sunak sort of accidentally fell into power, and he and his team have been sitting in number 10 trying to work out what the priorities are.
This former great nation, still full of wonderful, warm-hearted British people, has an education system with 100,000 missing children who never returned after lockdowns, an NHS with unprecedented waiting lists, excess deaths reaching more than 1,000 people per week last year, with nobody apparently bothered by that. We have trains that don't run, energy and petrol companies ripping us off, and eye-watering food inflation. So go on, Rishi, tell us from the heart, with passion, how you're going to fix it.
5 pledges to deliver peace of mind. First, we will halve inflation this year to ease the cost of living and give people financial security. Second, we will grow the economy, creating better paid jobs and opportunity right across the country. Third, we will make sure our national debt is falling so that we can secure the future of public services. Fourth, NHS waiting lists will fall and people will get the care they need more quickly. Fifth, we will pass new laws to stop small boats, making sure that if you come to this country illegally, you are detained and swiftly removed. Those are the people's priorities. They are your government's priorities, and we will either have achieved them or not. No tricks, no ambiguity.
In the real world, you can't get a train, you can't get a doctor's appointment, nurses are going to food banks, and when you do dial 999, you can't be sure that an ambulance is going to get there in time to save your loved one. That's the reality of Britain in 2023. And now you're here giving people more promises about how you might change the country that they've heard many times before during 13 years of Conservative rule. My question really is, why should the public believe you're any different to any of your predecessors?
People can trust that when I say I'm going to do something, I am going to do it.
Some of the solutions that he mentioned, more money for the National Health Service, more doctors and nurses, are true, but they don't meet the scale of the issue. And in fact, the funding for the NHS over the next 2 years is less than half a long-run historic average.
When asked what he would do about the NHS, he talks about the money that he's put into it. We know that the government is pushing money into the NHS over and over again. But he avoided the question of structural reform. He said, talked about free at the point of use, rolled out the old mantras. But as you say, a lot of the what, very little of the how.
And I was speaking to somebody today who described it as a polycrisis, not just a crisis, the worst that the NHS has ever been through, because it's across the board: social care, primary care, mental health services, hospitals, the ambulances that we're seeing queuing. So what was their reaction? Well, that this speech, of course, did not go far enough. It did not give enough detail. It was probably never intended to.
We've had 13 years now of Conservative government, and the fact the NHS is in such a parlous state and that patients are waiting hours on end to be seen in A&E or can't ever get a doctor's appointment, that's down to the actions of Rishi Sunak and his government.
I can't help but wonder whether or not he's setting himself up for failure here. Things like stopping the small boats, for example. Does that mean if one boat comes across this time next year, then he's failed?
I think it could be said that Rishi Sunak actually has been quite careful about what he's said there, because he's made these 5 promises, but only one, the first one, which is halve inflation, has any kind of time scale on it. Halve inflation by the end of the year, he says, something which is actually predicted to happen anyway. On the small boats thing, you'll notice the wording was introduce new laws to stop small boats. So he can introduce the laws. Will it actually stop the small boats? Is there anything actually holding him to account any further than that?
What did we actually learn today? As you said, Labour saying that they're not very difficult to comply with, and that they've been confected with that in mind. Some economists and business figures saying, well, actually, getting growth this year, anything that really feels or looks like growth, could be very difficult, and some of those other pledges as well. Very interestingly, Rishi Sunak emphasised today that he thinks the public will judge him on how hard he actually tried.